Hi friends, it's Deanna Willison with our Blooming Catholic Life, and we're here today with a sneak peek inside My God and My All, The Life of St. Francis of Assisi by Elizabeth, and I'm not exactly sure how she pronounces her last name, or pronounced, Gouged. It tells you that she was #1 New York Times best-selling author, but it doesn't tell you right on the cover. This is not like a brand new book. It was copyrighted in 1959 by Elizabeth, and then renewed in 1987 by C.S. Gerald Keeley and Jesse Monroe. No idea who those were, but it was first published in 1959 as St. Francis of Assisi in London and as My God and My All in New York. So it sounds like it was simultaneously published in that year. The cover image is the famous El Greco of St. Francis in Prayer, 1577 oil on canvas, is from the Museo Lazaro Galdiano in Madrid. That is the only picture that we're going to see, but you can see in this picture that St. Francis here already had the stigmata. So I'm imagining at this point in his life, he should look a lot more ill as well. By the time he got the stigmata, St. Francis was definitely not well and probably blind. There is an author's note here. Such a number of books have been written about St. Francis, and so many of them works of scholarship, that a writer, I want to point out like the chunky monkeys up here, right? We've got lots of them that are good, solid scholarship, that a writer who's not a scholar should probably apologize for the presumption of attempting yet another. My only excuse is that I wanted to write it so much that I had to do so. My hope is that it may serve to introduce St. Francis to a few who do not know him well, and perhaps make them want to know him better. At the end of the book is a short list of books which will give them a deeper knowledge of him than this one can do. Though some are out of print, they are all to be found in public libraries. Where I have quoted from the Fioretti, I have used the translation of Dr. Hugh Martin. The translation of the Canticle of the Sun is that of Matthew Arnold. The chapter headings from the Laudate of Jacopone de Todi are from the translation of Mrs. Theodore Beck. The quotation at the end of the book is from St. Bonaventure's Life of St. Francis. There are a couple of unfortunate things in there. One, it's a little unclear sometimes with all the he's and hims, but also a couple times, like the quotation in the book is from St. Bonaventure's Life of Francis. Well, St. Bonaventure didn't write in English, so whose translation did you use? It's interesting that all the other titles, some of the titles there are given in Italian or Latin, but not the Canticle of the Sun or St. Bonaventure's Life of Francis. I'm not sure why that isn't all parallel, but you know me, I'm a stickler for those details. Somebody tried to call me out in it recently saying how mean I was against the author. You can talk to any of my former homeschool students that I've tutored through the years. I am this tough a grader on everyone. I'm not picking on anyone here. I love this table of contents. It doesn't have our normal ... but there's so many great features here. It is nice and simple and clear and easy. Not the easiest maybe to find everything that you want referred to, so we'll hope that there's an index, but it's not listed here. We'll wait a bit and see if we find that. So they have parts. The parts are done with Roman numerals. The chapters are sequential throughout, so they don't restart at each part, and they're using Arabic numbers. You can see perhaps this line where it tells you the part and the title of the part, the name of the part, that could have been bolded, but that's as nitty gritty as I can get. The book is meant to be read sequentially, so the ... dots going over to the page numbers is not a huge deal to me. Some people may want to read it out of order, and so that may be a problem for them. Let's jump to the back. There is indeed the bibliography she mentioned. It is a very bare bones bibliography. It's mainly just the name of the author and the translator or edited. Like Mirror of Perfection just says the Temple Classics. So I'm not sure there. There is not an index. I apologize. That would have been lovely of the book to have an index, but there's not one here. So we're going to have to just try and read it ourselves. Now we're going to note that the page numbers are going to be in the bottom outside corners, which would have made it easy if there was an index to find things. However, there's not an index, but if you find page numbers, it will be easy to see. It has the title of the book on this side and the title of the chapter, not the section. The title of the chapter is up here. The section is not mentioned at all. This, again, the section numbers could have been, you could add like a 1, 2, 3, and 4, and then a number here, something to indicate but it's just the small chapter titles there. Now, whenever it is the beginning of a chapter, it's fairly easy to see. I'm flipping through till I find one. You have the chapter number in italics, and then in bold, the name of it, and then there's always an opening of a quote. It is always done that way. Now, there's some other features in here that we'll cover very quickly, and that is there are small sections within. Now, this having there's no number 1 here anywhere, right? There's no number 1 for the first section. However, just a few pages in, we will come to a number 2. There's several of these. They have 3 and 4. I don't know that I've seen above 4. So there are small sections within that aren't marked out in the table of contents. They kept the table of contents very short. So what are those chapters? Let's go back. The first one, let me do the parts first. It'll make more sense. So part 1 is Francesco Bernardoni. So that's really before he takes on the religious life. This is like origin story. Part 2 is Knights of God. So this is on first order, second order, third order. Part 3 is the Kingdom, which talks about the rich, the poor, the creatures, the chapter of Mats, and the Crusades. If you're not familiar with the chapter of Mats is, it's an event. It's like a big congress of Franciscans, and they carried with them little sleeping mats and sat on them for the congress. So it's called Chapter of Mats, that's all. And then the Crusades. Part 4 is the Power and the Glory, the Return, the Darkness, Midwinter Spring, Alvernia, the Last Journey, and the Larks, and then we have our bibliography. So let's go back to the beginning. I didn't tell you it was in there, the origin story. It has the beginning, the leper. So there's a pretty big jump there. I feel like there's a lot more that happens, but it's all covered between pages 1 and 14. The beginning. And then we jump straight to the leper, the crucifix, the builder, the crucifix here, the builder, my God and my all, and the rule. So it does end with the rule. So it focuses on the man first, his 3 orders, and then things they did while they were preaching, the kingdom, and then the power and the glory. The power and the glory has a lot to do with St. Francis after he returns from the Crusades, but he's so far doing the will of God. Separating Francis from God at that point may be a little bit difficult. So it's telling you about that end and that union there. Let's jump in, maybe get a little bit of a flavor from each of them. If you've been following our Lenten series from Cozy to the Cross, a Lenten adventure, we've been quoting from chapter 9, the third order already. So I'm not sure that we won't do that third order part. Let's see here. Let's jump to page 8. This is in the beginning. It is section 2. It says, the years passed uneventfully until Francis was 16 years old, and then they lifted him up on a flood of great events. In January 1198, the great Pope Innocent III ascended the pontifical throne, confronting a new emperor less vigorous than his predecessors, and a fresh passion for liberty spread over the country. The Pope's policy was to increase the power of the papacy by welding the Christian states into a confederacy under his rule, and he set himself to eject the German nobles from those provinces over which the Pope had formerly claimed overlordship. He demanded that Conrad of Lutzen should deliver up his fortress, the Rocca Maggiore of Assisi, and surrender all his holdings to the Pope. The old duke knew he could do nothing else, and he set out for Narni, a city to the south of Assisi, to make his submission to the cardinals there. It was for this that the people of Assisi had been waiting for so long. As soon as he had gone, they stormed out of the city, up the mountain to the castle, and battered it into ruins. Then they attacked the houses of the nobles within the city and set most of them on fire. Built so largely of wood, they burned easily. And Perugia, the city of imperial sympathies, saw the leap of the flames with her terrible watching eyes, and she too bided her time. Vengeance accomplished. The people of Assisi set to work to rebuild the ruinous old walls of the city. The whole population labored on these walls, Francis without doubt among them, learning the trick of carrying stones and wielding a trowel that later stood him in good stead. I'll stop there. You can see is it the Basilica of St. Francis of Assisi? You can see over San Damiano the little portion that St. Francis repaired himself. He may have gotten the trick of carrying stones and wielding a trowel, but we won't say he did a fabulous job. You can see very clearly the section that he did himself. But you already, didn't you just, you just want to jump in here with the author. She has a way with words. It's very engaging, very descriptive, very much painting the story out for you. And it tells it in a different way than most Franciscan books because of that richness of language. We were just talking about that in our From Cozy to the Cross series. The richness of language here is just so beautiful. Let's jump ahead, get something from the second section, which is a little more difficult because, again, it doesn't have section numbers there. So, Knights of God. So anything after page 95. Okay, well, there's this random one of these guys in here. So we'll go to this. It must have been important to me once, perhaps. Page 98, we're on the first order. Francis himself could be so happy, so attuned to the music of heaven, the veins of murmuring which he heard secretly, that he could not contain his joy, but would break out into singing. Sometimes in the woods he would pick up a branch from the ground and say, and laying it on his left arm, he drew it in his right hand, another like a stick bow over it, as if on a viol or other instrument, and making fitting gestures, sang with it in French unto the Lord Jesus Christ. And then suddenly, in the midst of his joy, he would remember the horror of sin and the agony of Christ who bore our sins in his own body on the tree, and he would break down and weep. The pattern of life that first 8 brothers had in the earliest days at the Porciuncula was the same now, the fourfold pattern of prayer, work, healing, and teaching. That was Christ's own pattern. Prayer came first, the worship and adoration of God for which man was created, the prayer of penitence for the sin of the world, of intercession for all for whom they labored. Francis taught them that without prayer no good can be wrought in the service of God, and that prayer was not only for their hours of contemplation in their cells or in the wood, or for the hours when they met together to say their offices, but for always. They must pray unceasingly, whether walking or sitting, within doors or without, in toil or in leisure. To those setting out on a journey, he said, meditate as much as while on this journey as if you were shut up in a hermitage or in your cell. For wherever we are, wherever we go, we carry our cell with us. For their body is our cell, and our soul is the hermit who dwells in it, there to pray to the Lord and meditate. And this is all heavily quoted, but not telling us where these quotes come from, but it must be the books in the back. Just holding it up to show you some of the print. You can see it's perfectly lovely. Perhaps she had told us at some point where she was talking from. Primacy of prayer there. It's so often forgotten in modern Franciscanism, but prayer was the first important thing. Let's look at page 175 and for our next section. We are in part 3 on the section, the poor. Let's read one of the quotes. Again, this is from that, pardon my Italian or Latin, I'm not sure, Jacopone da Todi Lauda LX. In a narrow heart God cannot bide. Where the love is great, the heart is wide. Poverty, great-hearted, dignified, entertains and welcomes deity. Poverty has nothing in her hand, nothing craves, in sea or sky or land, hath the universe at her command, dwelling in the heart of liberty. Though Francis was at ease among the rich, he was at home among the poor. He bore proudly and will bear for all time the title of Il Poverello, the poor man. He had built up his own life and the life of his order upon the foundation stone of poverty. His home was the homelessness of Lady Poverty, and his riches her dereliction. It is hard to grasp the passion of his dedication to poverty. It was as deep and strong as his dedication to Christ, because in his thought they were never separated. It was to Christ in the dereliction of the cross who had taken possession of him in the church of San Damiano. The life of Christ that he shared in his poverty, of Christ himself who he served in his poor. And he was so determined that there must be no man anywhere who was poorer than he. If he was tramping along the road in the pouring rain with perhaps a sack that someone had given him around his shoulders as an added protection, and he saw a beggar coming along with nothing but his rags, the sack immediately came off him and was given to the beggar, for he said, I think the greater almsgiver would account it a theft in me, did I not give that I wear unto one needing it more. When he met poor folk carrying burdens, he would immediately take them onto his own shoulders, though there could have been few of them who were not far more able to carry a heavier weight than he was. He was never known to refuse a beggar. When he was on the road and had nothing whatever to give, not even an old sack, he would tear off a bit of his own worn habit and give it rather than say no, and these scraps of his garments were inestimable treasures to those who possessed them. They believed that through him Through them, healing came to their sick bodies. Certainly healing came to their sick souls through knowing that there was a man in the world ready to pour out his very life for them, and feeling through that knowledge to a dim realization that that was what God had done. I need to stop there. Whew, powerful, right? I know you're probably dying to read this book yourself, and you're going to have to grab it. Let's just look here. The Return, 2227. Get something from our last section. And I'll jump back. We'll come to page 228. Francis has returned from the Crusades. The news could have hardly been worse. The two men to whom he had entrusted the government of the order in his absence, his two friends, Matthew of Narni and Gregory of Naples, had betrayed the trust he had placed in them. They had put themselves at the head of the discontented brothers, and at a chapter meeting over which they presided, they had imposed upon the order a new set of constitutions, which were totally at variance with the rule that Innocent III had ratified, the rule which all the brothers minor had vowed to keep, the command of God which made them what they were. The loyal brothers who had refused to consider themselves bound by the new constitutions had been persecuted by the two vicars general. Some of them had been driven out of the order altogether, and Stephen had had to escape from Italy secretly without the knowledge of the vicars. The new constitutions were admirably devised for preparing the knights of God to forsake lady poverty and play a distinguished part in the affairs of the church. The Franciscan missionaries were no longer to go about carrying their lives in their hands, objects of ridicule and potential martyrs. They were to carry with them the letters of protection from the Pope, and the order was to do no work that had not received legal sanction. The small families of brothers that Francis had favored as fostering brotherly love and holiness were not to be superseded by much larger communities of men, living not in small hermitage and rustic places, but in well-built convents. These convents were to possess libraries so that the brothers minor might become the equals of other religious orders in learning and scholarship. Discipline was to be enforced by a bewildering number of rules and regulations, replacing the few simple precepts of love that had been based on the gospel of Christ. When Francis was told of it all, many memories must have passed through his mind, memories of his Lord and Master, of the old happy days of the order. No legal sanctions had protected Christ and his apostles from martyrdom, and no stone walls had housed them, keeping out wind and rain and beggars. Christ could have been the greatest scholar the world has ever known, but he said goodbye to the scribes in the temple at Jerusalem and went home to Nazareth with his parents and was subject unto them. He could have been a great man among the princes of the world, but he chose his friends among the outcast and the poor. Francis remembered the sunshine of the spring day when Bernard had given away all his wealth to the poor. There would not have been such joy in the square if he had been building a library. If he had been building a library with it. He remembered Pacifico crying out to him, "Take me away from the world and give me back to God." And he had been able to do it in a matter of minutes, not after a year's novitiate. He remembered nights sleeping out under the stars, and the friendliness of the birds and the flowers and the creatures, and the friendliness of a poor man when you shared your last crust with him, both of you huddled together on the leeward side of a haystack on a cold night. No doubt the new constitutions were full of wisdom and common sense, and rules much like them regulated the lives of the other orders. But the brother minor were not other orders. They had been called by God to embrace the poverty and suffering of Jesus Christ, their Lord, for the salvation of sinners for whom he died. And I'll leave you there. You'll have to see how this works out. Friends, I hope you enjoyed our little time with My God and My All. Secular Franciscans, I don't know about all of the third orders, but we are expected to read a biography of St. Francis every year. And so this is obviously one option for you. God bless you, friends.